There's an old joke. I actually first heard it in Slovak, where the husband proudly declares, "I am the head of the household," to which he then humbly adds, "but my wife is the neck." There's actually some powerful symbolism in that anecdote, and it's found in the Parsha of the week, vayigash, which we will be reading this Shabbat coming, 16th of December, 15th of September. And I've said this for years, and I still maintain the portion of vayigash is the most dramatic and powerful, emotional parsha of all the parshat of the Torah. The impact is enormous because it is the parsha where Joseph, after having been sold into slavery by his own brothers, and over the past few weeks, the brothers have been brought to Egypt by the impending famine, from which Egypt is not vulnerable because, thanks to Joseph's foresight and ability to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh, they have been saving up the grain from the 7 good years so that they can survive on it and indeed save the rest of the region during these 7 bad years. And so it is, the brothers of Joseph come to Egypt and unknowingly meet Joseph, the one who is in charge of distributing wheat. And he already has witnessed how they regret their actions. Indeed, in last week's parsha, Joseph had to depart from the room, and he cried. He was so moved by the regrets of his brothers. Now, in response to his demand, they have brought his own brother from the same mother, Rachel, from Israel to Egypt. And as part of a process wherein Joseph is trying to evoke the brotherly love towards Benjamin, and indeed indirectly towards himself, he tells Judah that Binyamin will remain a slave in Egypt as a punishment for having stolen his goblet, which of course he did not do. But at this stage, Yehuda makes an impassioned speech, really one of the most beautiful monologues in all of the Torah, the essence of which is that the soul of his father Jacob is bound up with the soul of Benjamin, and if they return to Israel without Benjamin, Jacob will die from grief. At this point, Joseph cannot bear it any longer. Everyone is sent out of the room, and he says, "I am your brother Joseph, who you sold to slavery." And it's a powerfully emotional, tearful reunion, particularly vis-a-vis the reunion of Joseph and Benjamin. They go back to Israel and bring back Jacob, after which follows another emotional reunion between Jacob and Joseph. Jacob first had to be convinced that Joseph was still alive, for indeed it was the same brothers who had shown Jacob the bloodied coat, the special gift from Jacob, and led him to believe that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. And so we have this very emotional reunion, first of the brothers with Joseph, and then of the father, Jacob, with Joseph, tying together the loose ends of this long story and presenting a prelude to the last 17 years of the life of Jacob, which turned out to be the most tranquil and happiest years of his life. After all the trauma of thinking that his beloved son Joseph had been killed, following the other sufferings, the raping of Dinah in Vayishlach, and the 20 years in Haran, 14 of which were devoted to laboring for the hand of the two wives, who were the two sisters, Leah and Rachel. The confrontation with Esau, which, although having been concluded successfully, was unusually tense, and he feared for his life. Now, everything has fallen into place. He's with his children. He is with Joseph. They're all together, and they dwell in the land of Goshen in a time of prosperity, although in the next second book of Exodus, that will then be followed up by their eventual enslavement and suffering. But I want to focus on the reunion, a very interesting insight, which is taken from a talk of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which I emphasize because this particular talk, or Sicha as it's called, taken from the book called Likutei Sichot, which was written based on these talks. Well, this is actually a very classic Sicha. And I'm going to explain it in the very next segment.